Whenever Bush or Clinton or Obama or Piers Morgan starts their song and dance justifying military obscenities against Muslim societies, where the only destruction is on the target, they compare themselves to Churchill without even referencing his defects as a colonialist. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was among those who resisted Churchill's colonial mindset. He wanted the Axis, the French, who were Vichy French and allies of the Japanese, out of Vietnam. Churchill made his reputation in the history books by browbeating everybody who said that we had to surrender to Hitler, of which there were actually a considerable faction in the United States. How that translates in the fat head of Piers Morgan to abomination after abomination visited on the children of Gaza takes work. How he manages to hotwire around the coup d'etat in the Maidan Revolution in 2014 in the Ukraine, Kiev, which had snipers shooting both sides to get them going, also takes work. Where do you begin in dealing with a man who interrupts you anytime his front line of excuses is penetrated? He says that October 7th proves that Hamas are terrorists who represent an existential threat to Israel because any force that commits a massacre of 1,200 civilians is intolerable, right? The people who argue, which I am not arguing yet, I'm not presenting my opinion yet. I'm just talking about the defective attitude of Piers Morgan. He would immediately shut me down without even allowing me to represent the view of his opposition. It's not my own view. My own view is different. The view of his opposition is that if he took the construction he made, massacring large number of people at will, you would see that Israel is the one who represents an existential threat to Gaza and always has. Always has. They authored Nakba. They're squatters who are exterminating people who are ancient people in an ancient land who wanted to live with them peacefully. And he dares, in his mania, in his fat head, represent these largely helpless people as Nazi Germans incarnate. Anytime George Bush wanted an enemy, he said, "There's Hitler. He's incarnate again." It's so stupid, but they see it working for them. So they keep at it. Hamas's tunnels were a legitimate underground railroad, which brought in not mercenary supplies, not terrorist supplies, but food, water, educational supplies. They were for trade. Because the occupation had clamped down to the point where they were splitting hairs about how many calories should be allowed into Gaza. The obscenity of the occupation is so lost on Piers Morgan that he arrives to my perception of what happened with his own head on a silver platter. He should put it in a bag for JFK. Hamas did Netanyahu a favor. He did the favor from all of the powerful people who hated Arab Spring, who detest the educational dignity, self-help, brilliance, and beauty of the Palestinian people, who stood by and let Israel do the dirty work, while Piers Morgan sat on major television statements and brayed. He interrupted anybody who crossed the line. I'll give you an example. He said, do you or do you not denounce Hamas and their raid on October 7th? And by insisting on that, he changes the subject immediately and refuses to answer the question, do you or do you not support a genocide directed against children? And he is precariously close to himself, not only being a war criminal, but criminally insane. So it's a relief when he switches gears and starts talking about the Ukraine, because then his bluster in the Churchillian bullhorn drowns himself out without being swayed. He rants and spews neo-Nazism and attributes it to his guru, Churchill. Churchill, the neo-Nazi. It started with the coup d'etat in Kiev. They were offered peace terms in Minsk. The people who have been suffering the most in Ukraine before Putin invaded were the Russians in Donbass. Now you ask me, should Putin be allowed to invade? I certainly didn't think he should invade. He had proven to me what his points he was making were. But who is going to pick up the torch to protect the people of Donbass any more than anybody's picking up the torch to protect the people in Gaza? Putin certainly isn't picking up the torch to protect the people in Gaza, and he's not about to. These fascist groups are into military society. They want one conception of mankind, and that is the abolition of man. They want us all to be robomatons who serve in the capacity of knights of resignation for one side or the other, and march into the meat grinder together, based on absurd pitches from men with fat heads who refuse to consider the possibility that something has gone wrong in analysis, negotiations, and diplomacy. Oh, John Mearsheimer, he puts on such a noble carriage when it comes to Nosferatu's support of Hamas. He says, oh, I can see why he doesn't want Hamas there anymore. Why did he want him in the first place? So they could pull this move and do him this favor. Has he ever admitted that the aerial photographs why didn't he argue what he knows? Why didn't Mearsheimer argue what he knows about Morgan and Hamas and Israel? Which was that the Hellfire helicopters took out all of the vehicles that were killed. That many of the people who were killed as civilians were killed by the Israeli Hellfire scorched earth program. Some and they held back and let it happen. They were warned 2 days before. Do you support their refusal to acknowledge that Egypt called them on October 5th? Quit changing the subject, Piers. And they moved the supernova rave. After being warned on October 5th, they moved the supernova rave. So there would be civilians. That's my point of view. So you say, do I approve of Hamas wiping out a supernova rave for Nosferatu so he'd have an excuse to go into Gaza? Is that what you're going to ask me? Why don't you just have your fat head, wrap your fork tongue wrap around your fat head and squeeze, instead of asking such a doofus question?